the Director of History and Genealogy at the Atlanta History Center. She manages all History Center oral history initiatives, including the Veterans Project, which we'll learn about today. Sue schedules and conducts interviews, maintains equipment, and processes catalogs and facilitates online access to those interviews. She creates exhibitions and programs to highlight the History Center's oral history collections, including the 2018 exhibition, More Than Self, Living the Vietnam War. The exhibition used photographs, artifacts, and firsthand accounts from the Veterans History Project to document the Vietnam experience. Sue is the public face of oral history at AHC and works to cultivate community partnerships to expand and enhance oral history holdings and associated archival collections. Prior to joining the History Center staff in 2008, Sue taught 6th and 8th grade social studies and language arts here in Henry County, Georgia. She's a graduate of Brigham Young University and the University of West Georgia. Everyone, please help me in welcoming Sue VerHoef to the Georgia Archives.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I was a little worried that it was going to be me and Robin, and that was going to be it this morning. So I hope you'll bear with me. Technology is the bane of my existence these days. Everything that I was going to show you today worked perfectly in my office yesterday, and this morning when I came in, it doesn't. So we're going to punt up just a little bit. But what I wanted to do today is explain to you a little bit about the Veterans History Project. First of all, how many of you in this room are veterans? Thank you. Thank you for your service. How many of you know or love a veteran? Awesome. Those are good percentages. Very good. All right. So this is a project that the Atlanta History Center has been doing for a very long time. And I like to promote it as much as I can because I feel like it's probably one of the most important things that we can be doing right now. During the pandemic, we'll talk a little more about this later in the presentation, but we do a Veterans Day ceremony every year. And when the pandemic hit, we did that ceremony virtually. And I was asked to provide a few remarks for a virtual ceremony that we did right there at the Atlanta History Center. And in doing a little bit of research for that presentation, I was really stunned by the percentages and how they have dropped. And I should have looked them up before this, but I want to say it was somewhere in the order of 11% of all Americans have any contact whatsoever with a veteran who is currently serving. The percentages I do remember for Congress, for both houses of Congress, it was something like 20%. Only 20% of the members of Congress had ever served. And I feel like there's a distancing that's happened. That people just aren't, my generation growing up, everybody had a parent that served in World War II. Everybody had a high school friend, that served in Vietnam. And I feel like we're moving away from that a little bit today. And we just feel like this project is so important, not only to honor our veterans, but to teach others what the experience of being a veteran is like, not only from the veterans' perspective, but from the civilians who supported them and from their families. So without further ado, Veterans History Project, Atlanta History Center's Veterans History Project. A little bit about us. We partner, we are a founding partner actually with the Library of Congress. So we've been collecting longer than the Library of Congress. We've been collecting since 1995. And it's my understanding, that was long before my time, but it's my understanding that many of those interviews were collected in an effort to support an exhibit that we were putting together called V for Victory, that was designed to sort of explain how Georgians experienced World War II. So we started collecting in 1995, and then in 2000, Congress voted for the Library of Congress to have funding to collect, preserve, and make accessible veterans' stories. And of course, Library of Congress can't do that by themselves. And the funding, I have to clarify this always, the funding is for the Library of Congress, not the institutions across the country. So we get no funding for this, but the Library of Congress gets the funding to make sure that these are preserved. So they went across the country looking for partners, and the Atlanta History Center is a founding partner in this project with the Library of Congress. actively collecting since 1995, like I mentioned. We've got over 800 interviews in the collection so far. The interviews range from World War II through the Global War on Terror, and they cover the gamut: gender, branch of service, conflict, place of service, geographic. It runs the gamut. We feel like it's a fairly diverse collection. Although I will say we feel like we're a little short on women, and I'm looking at some of you in the audience here. So spread the word. It's been a little difficult to get women to talk about their experience. We've got a few Army nurses from the Vietnam War era. I've got a few folks that have spoken up from the Global War on Terror, a few women that have come to do their oral histories, but we'd love to get more women if we could. So about 800 interviews so far, and this is the most active of our oral history projects. The Atlanta History Center has a bunch of oral history collections, but the one that's the most active, where we are, in fact, I've done 2 interviews already this week. The most active of those projects is the Veterans History Project. It is veteran facilitated. We can't quantify why that's important. I couldn't show you statistics for that, but we have an instinct that having a veteran on the other side of the camera makes a difference and creates a little bit more of a rapport and a little bit more of a safe space. So all of our veteran volunteer interviewers are Vietnam era veterans, and I think 6 of the 8 are combat veterans. We also partner with 2 important organizations here in Atlanta. Our longest partner is the Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association. They have partnered with us since the Library of Congress started their part of the project in 2000. And our other wonderful partner is the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. The Atlanta branch of that organization has been a wonderful partner for us in helping us to gather those stories as well. So we're very grateful for those community partners, because we couldn't do what we do without it. And we've been very lucky so far in that word of mouth has kind of been enough. It's kept us really busy. As you would imagine, the pandemic kind of shut things down for a while. We had a little bit of difficulty during the pandemic, and we have not reached our pre-pandemic numbers yet, but I'm hopeful that that will happen. So having those partners has been amazing. The other challenge that I have found as director of this project is I've found it nearly impossible to thoroughly plug in to the Global War on Terror veterans. The National Association of Black Military Women has been extremely helpful in getting us some interviews of folks that served in the more recent conflicts. I don't know whether it's because Global War on Terror veterans are younger, still going to school, still raising families, or whether they just perceive that what they did is not historical. Not exactly sure what the difference is, but I'm hoping that when I sail off into the sunset, someone will take over this project that will have some energy to get into that community and see if we can figure out how to do that. I attend an awful lot of veterans fairs and other functions, and every time I connect up with someone who's part of the VFW post or the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans Association, I get business cards and they're like, yeah, we want to do this. This is great. I send out the emails and I get crickets. So I haven't quite figured out how to, maybe it's just me. So I'm still working on that. So let's see if I can make this work. So wanted to talk just a little bit about the process. Typically someone, again, it's a word of mouth kind of thing. I will either have connected with someone at a veteran fair, or we used to get a lot of mileage out of the World War II Heritage Days down in Peachtree City and the Warbird weekends up at Peachtree DeKalb Airport. We attended a wonderful We Care Veterans Fair in Cobb County back in November, I think it was, October, November, and found a lot of folks that way. But at any rate, however they have found us, the process typically starts like this. So before the interview, we send out a biographical data form, which is a Library of Congress document. And it really just serves as a way to collect contact information and basic information about the veteran's service. So what years were you in? What branches did you serve in? Were you wounded? Were you a prisoner of war? Any awards that you want to tell us about? It just gives us a little bit of background information about the veteran so that we can prepare for the interview. So that's the first thing that goes out is a biographical data form. And then once that's completed and sent back to us at the History Center, then we work on scheduling. And it's always, what's best for the veteran, what's the most convenient day and time. We typically do the interviews at the Atlanta History Center because we have a beautiful professional recording studio where we can control the light and the sound very carefully. But for any veteran for whom travel to the History Center is problematic, we have no trouble at all coming to their home. Of the 2 interviews I did this week, the first one was a World War II veteran, believe it or not, World War II veteran in his Woodstock home, and I hauled all our equipment up there and did that interview in his home. And then the second one was done at the History Center because the veteran was able to make that trip. So we try to do it at the History Center if we can. We typically do them either in the morning at 10:30 or in the afternoon at about 1:30. We have found that those times tend to get folks in and out of Buckhead traffic before it gets incredibly ugly. I am probably not going to be scheduling any more interviews until after the first of the year because in December, you just don't want to be in Buckhead. Just don't. It's not a good place to be. So we work on scheduling. We make sure that everything is convenient for the veteran. And then after the scheduling is done, then I line up an interview team. I make the call out to my staff of volunteer interviewers. 2 folks will typically step up. We always interview in teams. It's kind of an oral history best practices to make sure that whoever is facilitating the interview is focused 100% on the veteran, on the narrator. So you don't want to be looking at the camera or looking at the time or looking at other stuff. You want to make sure you're focusing on your veteran. So we have another person in the room who takes notes, and then I run the camera. So it's usually a 3-person team when we can, when they're done at the Atlanta History Center. So once the interview team is lined up, then I send out another email, a confirmation email to the veteran, telling them who their team is and providing a lot more information to help them prepare. So I send out always copies of the release forms. There are 2 forms, one for the Library of Congress and one for the Atlanta History Center. And those forms are just for review. We certainly do not expect the veteran to print them or sign them. We don't want you to do that. They're just for you to look at so you have a good chance to review all of that legalese that you get in release forms. And then there's always a pre-interview guide. And the pre-interview guide, we hope, tells you kind of everything you need to know. That the camera captures you from about here to about here. You want to be careful not to wear clunky jewelry because that can interfere with the microphone. Average interview time is anywhere from 45 minutes to about an hour and a half. It's your story. You tell us to turn the camera off whenever you want us to turn the camera off. It's a little bit of information to help them prepare. We'll talk about the topics that typically come up in the interview. We'll make it clear that if you've got photographs or documents or artifacts that you'd like to share on camera, feel free to bring those with you. So it's as much information as we can give you to kind of help you to understand how the process of the interview is going to go. So once that confirmation form is sent, then we are all up and ready to go. And I'll send a reminder email the day before. If there's any questions, that's the time to ask them. If the veteran would like to meet with the interview team, we can always do that, or just have a chat on the phone with the interview team, whatever's easiest for the veteran. And again, we really encourage you. A lot of veterans will tell us, before, while they were preparing for the interview, they sat down with a box full of photos, and it really helps to kind of jog that memory, helps you to remember those things. We also want to emphasize that the Veterans History Project is a 2-part project. The one half of the project is the interview itself, and that's a movie file, right? The other half of the project is anything the veteran feels would be significant to flesh out his or her story. So most of our veterans will donate either original copies or originals of service records, photographs, unit newsletters, unit histories, anything they can think of. Or if they're not prepared to part with those originals, we like originals, of course, because those things allow us to do the exhibits that we'll talk about later on. But we also understand that many veterans aren't prepared to part with those originals yet. And if that's the case, then we ask the veteran to make a little selection. If you could select maybe 10 things, 10 documents and photos that helps to shed more light on your military experience, they will loan those to us, a loan to copy situation where we'll borrow them with their permission. And then our reprographics manager will either take photographs or high-res scans, and then we return the originals to the donor. So that can be done any one of a number of ways, but that really does help to kind of flesh out their military experience. During the interview, the picture that you see on the left there is what our studio used to look like. I really hated that black backdrop. It was always wrinkled. It always looked like a mess. It was a great step up from the early days of the interviewing, where we used to interview in a conference room up in the museum. And my favorite story for that was the African-American merchant mariner. He is, I think, the only merchant mariner we have from World War II in the collection. Amazing story. In the middle of his story, talking about when his ship was sunk out from underneath him, 100 miles off the coast of Brazil, and he was climbing into a lifeboat to spend a couple of days waiting to be rescued, someone out in the hallway started hammering. So we're really glad we don't have to do that anymore. Those were the early days. We were still learning what we were doing. Now we have this beautiful studio. When we first moved into the studio, we had that backdrop, which was better than the backdrop that we had in the conference room, but still wasn't good enough. So a member of our board was associated with Turner Broadcasting, and she very graciously facilitated some folks from Turner Broadcasting to come over, and they took a good look at what we had, helped us purchase and install lighting and a proper backdrop. And so, yeah, what we have now looks so much better. Very happy for that. It's all done by video on a high definition camera. The camera is important for a couple of reasons. Some people are concerned about being on camera, and we understand that. And if there's concerns about being on camera, we'll likely still do the interview on camera, but we can always strip the sound. The way that I look at it, if you do audio only, you have audio only, and that's it. But if you do a video film presentation, then you've got both aspects of it. If you need the visual part of it, you can use it. If you don't need it, it's really easy to strip the video from the audio and just use the audio. So we kind of chose to stick with the high definition camera. Again, it's veteran facilitated, but the most important thing is it's the veteran's story. The best interviews that we have ever done are ones in which the person conducting or facilitating the interview almost doesn't say anything. There's a little script that we have to read at the beginning that's, the date, the place, who's in the room, what we're doing, right? Typically, the interviewer will start with a question like, tell us a little bit about your background and growing up years. Some veterans will spend 20 minutes on that. Some veterans will just say, I was born in Chicago and I've got one sister. That's entirely up to the veteran. But we have gotten some amazing stuff in those first little few minutes of the film. Some of our World War II veterans will talk about their father's service in World War I and what rationing was like during World War I. And that's pretty cool when you've got someone who's kind of almost got firsthand experience with those things, or at least secondhand experience. So that's usually the way we start. And then if the veteran doesn't get there on his or her own, we'll ask, how did you get into the service? Were you drafted? Did you join? Did you did you choose a branch for a specific reason? How did your family feel about it? How did your friends feel about it? Those kinds of questions. And then from then on, we like to just sit back and be quiet and let the veteran tell their story the way that they want to. Typically, it's kind of chronological, but we always tell them, don't worry about that either, because that's kind of the way your memory works. We tend to think about things chronologically, but one memory can lead to another. And so there is some back and forth, and that's not a problem. We don't want them to worry about acronyms. We don't want them to worry about maybe misspoken dates. It's very common when someone maybe is talking about Pearl Harbor and they'll say, yeah, 1981. We know they meant 1941, not to be concerned about that. And there's always options for a second interview or for errata to be written out if there are, issues where someone forgot something or wants to add something. So it's not unusual at all for there to be emotion, and you'll see an example of that here in just a little bit. We always tell our veterans, we're not going to turn off the camera unless you tell us to, though. because some of those moments are incredibly powerful, and we don't want to be the one making those decisions. If the veteran wants to stop to gather emotions or gather thoughts or take a sip of water off camera or, use the restroom, whatever, all they have to do is say, I need to take a break, and we will stop and move forward whenever they're ready. After the interview, and I love this image, this is Wiley Verdon in the Korean War doing the paperwork, right? Job's not over till the paperwork is done. So after the interview, there is a little bit of paperwork. First of all, the release forms, but we again make it very clear to our veterans, you don't have to sign this paper right now. If you want to go home and watch the interview and make sure that you're happy with it before you sign the release form, that is perfectly fine with us. It's a little scary for us because we can't accession that interview without that form. So we just want to make sure it doesn't get kind of put off on the back burner where someone forgets. So we are kind of anxious for that decision to be made. But having said that, I have had veterans who have signed that release form and have decided later on that they do not want their interview made available to the public for a specified period of time. And we have immediately taken it down and honored that request. What's most important for us is the trust that we establish with our veterans. I don't care what you signed. If you want this interview to come down, it's going to come down, and we're going to do what you tell us to do with it because this is your story. So if we can, we take care of release forms after the interview. Then I go downstairs and do the post-production processing, and I create a DVD to send to the veteran with a little handwritten thank you and a family pass to the History Center. And we try to get that in the mail within a day or two of the interview. And that DVD is for the veteran to keep, share, do whatever they want to do with. We're also more than happy to share the MP4 or the access file. So the original raw files that come off the camera are ginormous, as you might imagine. So the first step for me is to create an MP4, which is a smaller, more compressed version of the file. And that's how we create the DVD. But I'm more than happy to send the MP4. That's really easy to do. And some of our more tech savvy veterans or veterans who have grandchildren that are tech savvy, they're going to want that MP4 to play around with. With the veteran's permission, the video is shared with the Library of Congress, where it will also be archived and described and made accessible to the public. They have about 100,000 of them, so it takes them a little longer to get their interviews online, but they're working hard on that too. In a perfect world, we'll transcribe it. I had a volunteer transcriptionist that worked with me for about a decade. We unfortunately lost her. She was in her 80s and passed away a couple of years ago. There has been no one really to do that work since then, and I have no staff and no budget. I always have to say that. Well, boss probably would hate me for saying that, but it's true. It's the life, it's the nonprofit life, right? It's always a little hard to come up with funding to do these things, but we are looking at artificial intelligence. Some of those possibilities are kind of exciting. Anything you do that way still has to be word for word, minute by minute, checked by a human who knows what they're doing. But that still, we think, is going to kind of cut down on the time period. So I'm hoping to get some funding to do that. So it will be transcribed, and then it will be, even before it's transcribed, it's going to be cataloged and made available on the website. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute. And then any associated archival materials, anything that the veteran might want to have donated, either in digital form or in the real thing, the three-dimensional or originals, are permanently archived at the Atlanta History Center and become a part of that veteran's record. And we have acquired some really outstanding things that way. So you can search the collection online. I'm going to see if this works. Hopefully it does. I've got 746 interviews online right now. I'm down to about the last 60 or so that I need to get online. Thankfully and unthankfully, it's bad that we're not up to our pre-pandemic numbers, but then on the other hand, it's kind of good because it gives me a little bit more time to catch my breath. So I'm hoping to get every single interview in the collection available online by the end of June, which is the end of our fiscal year. So you can hold my feet to the fire. You can email me on June 30th and ask me if I did that. That's my goal. All 800 plus interviews, hopefully by the end of June of 2024. So here's what it looks like, and I'm hoping that this is going to work. And you can't see what I can see. So what did I do wrong, Robin? Ay, 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 ay. How about if I just do that? Does that work? Okay, we'll just do that. And where was I? This, yeah, this one. Yep, you can see. Okay, great. Awesome. So this is what the landing page looks like. There's a little bit of a disclaimer there. It's important to kind of point out that, these are unvarnished stories. We do not do any editing whatsoever. The only time I've ever edited anything is for the veterans' protection. So this is my favorite example. Had a lovely veteran that we interviewed, Vietnam veteran, not too many years ago, and he was heavily involved in a story. He'd forgotten the camera was on, which is good. We like that. And he was telling us a story about a high school teacher that he had that was a mentor to him, that she was just such an important force in his life. And he kind of leaned back in his chair and he said, yeah, in fact, if you want to hack into all my banking, all you have to do is know Mrs., blah, blah, blah. And you can get into all my bank accounts. Well, I went back and I redacted that little part so nobody can hear that, So sometimes people will forget and list addresses, things like that. We want to make sure that we're protecting our veterans' privacy. So things like that we'll redact, but we don't redact other things, unless the veteran asks us to. And so there's some hard stories in there. As you can imagine, these are men and women who have seen the absolute worst that humanity can provide. And so there's some difficult stories in there, and we want to make sure people understand that before they click through to the collection. So there's a little disclaimer there. You can either browse the collection by clicking there, and you can just kind of go along and look and see who you want to talk to, or you can zero in on somebody. And in honor of Masters of the Air coming out next month, I'm going to type one of my favorite 8th Air Force guys in here. Frank Murphy. So here we interviewed Frank a couple of times, but here's Frank Murphy's interview. And you can see when you scroll down, you've got a little bit of descriptive information about what's in that interview. You've got geographic locations where he served, units that he served, and people that he talked about, keywords. So it's, searchable by all manner of things. You can come back up here and do the advanced search, or you can go in here and search for Market Garden or First Battle of Fallujah or Iraq, and it will bring up all of the interviews where that was discussed. So they are searchable and available on our website. You can see we deliver them via YouTube. We kind of hate YouTube, but unfortunately, and I won't bore you with the details, it was the only way that we could make them accessible because our content management system just choked on a 9 gigabyte oral history interview. It just couldn't manage that. But we do keep a very close eye on YouTube. We keep a very close eye on the comments, and we've got rules of civility that are prominently posted there. So we feel, and to be honest, they get so much more viewing on YouTube than they do on our website because everybody uses YouTube, right? So one of the clips I'm going to show you here is from an Army nurse. Her interview has been watched 55,000 times and counting. People find them there. And then we always put a link there to direct them back to our website. So we hope that they will find them there too. So lots of really, really, really good stuff to see there. So let's see where we were. Where was I? I think I was here, maybe. Yeah, there we go. And you know what? I'm just going to leave it so that we're not bouncing back and forth. We use the materials, both the interviews and the artifacts and archival materials that are donated in association with the interviews. We use these for exhibitions and programs at the Atlanta History Center. And actually, I will have to go just real quickly to get this link right fast. Okay. And do this. See if I can get rid of that. I am so sorry. What did I tell you about technology? It's the bane of my existence. Yes, there we go. More Than Self, Living the Vietnam War was a brick and mortar exhibit that I curated back in 2017. It was located in the Archives building right outside the library. We had wonderful artifacts. We had everything from a Montagnard crossbow to a deactivated Viet Cong homemade hand grenade, boots, army boots, a steel pot helmet, a lot of great artifacts in that exhibit. But also, again, the stories, clips from the stories and photographs and documents. When that exhibit closed in March of 2018, our wonderful folks in our marketing department converted it to an online exhibit. So this is kind of fun. You can go to the History Center and look for More Than South in our exhibits page. And what we did was we kind of divided the exhibit into 6 topics, which are kind of the 6 recurring themes that we tended to hear from our Vietnam veterans. A little bit about first impressions of the country, what they felt like being there, and then the actual living conditions. America's involvement would be the combat aspect of it. Enemies and allies, we talked about working with the South Vietnamese, the ARVN forces, as well as the Montagnard, and what it was like, facing the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. Never Forgotten, it kind of talks about the POW experience and those that were killed in action. And then the home front kind of talked a little bit about what the the anti-war sentiment here and how that played out when veterans returned home. So just to give you a quick idea, I'm just going to click on being there just for ducks. So if I click on being there, there's going to be a little bit of information kind of about general stuff, just sort of surviving in Vietnam. And then you've got, great, these are some of the artifacts that we had on display and different stories. And when you come down a little further, you've got a kind of a spotlight story and then a clip from that story. And then if you come down a little further, you can go to additional interview clips from the collection. So there's a story there, and then you move down to America's involvement. You can get into the actual combat. These are different combat photographs and artifacts and stories as well. So that's one way that we like to share the information that we collect in these interviews. And then I thought I would share just a couple of clips. So to give you a little bit of background information, this one on the left, this is one of my favorite photographs from that exhibit. I hope you can see it clearly. This is Army nurse Jenny Dornhagen, and she is teaching a little Vietnamese child how to do the peace symbol. Jenny agreed to come in and share her story, and I'm going to share a clip of that with you in just a second. And then the second clip that you're going to hear is an African-American Marine Corps. Milton Jones was in the United States Marine Corps and left and came home just before the Battle of Quai Son. His story is really interesting because he talks about what it was like to come home. So let me just share both of these clips for you, if I can. Okay.
When a patient was dying, we never, ever left our soldiers die by themselves. We were always there with them. One of us would be assigned to that patient, and we would be there with him the whole time, holding hands, talking with him. If he wanted us to write to his mom or his dad, we did. It was tough. We just wanted to make sure that their mom and dad or their loved ones knew that they were not alone. We didn't have that opportunity when they died on the field, but we had that opportunity when they were in the hospital.
I'm really sorry that the sound is so poor. We did everything we could to get good sound for you. Were you able to hear that? Okay. So that's Jenny. I love that story. And then here's Milton Jones. Let me see if I can get him going.
We land, several of us, again, traveling individually. I don't know these guys. Several of us get off the plane, again, another Continental Airlines charter with flight attendants, the whole kit and caboodle. We land at Travis Air Force Base. We get off the plane. We're so thankful to be back in the world, the good old US of A. We get off the plane, we kiss the runway, kneel down and kiss the runway. I'm home, I'm back in the world, everything's going to be great. A few hours later, after processing out, we walk off the base, along comes a hippie bus, they throw crap, feces, whatever else out on us, call us all sorts of names, and it's like, okay, how can I fit this experience into the feelings that I was just expressing? And I couldn't.
Were you able to hear that one all right? Okay. There's a lot of people out there that will say that Vietnam veterans were not mistreated when they came home. And so that's another reason why it's important to to have these interviews, because that absolutely did happen. So, so sorry that I'm having so much trouble with the tech here. So that's one example of the kinds of things that we do with the interviews. Another example that I wanted to share with you real quickly is our Veterans Park. So every November on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, we have a ceremony, a Veterans Day ceremony on the park. Please come. It's free, and admission to the museum is typically free on those days too. Of course, admission to the museum is free for veterans every day. But it's a great ceremony, and it never lasts more than an hour, which I kind of like about it. It's a great kind of a nugget, a way to honor our veterans, you know, that doesn't take a whole lot of time out of people's day. It's something everybody can do. There's always music. There's always a featured speaker. This year, I think it was Wendy Carpenter, who was the first full 4-star, I guess, admiral in the Navy. So we were really glad to have her that year. But it's kind of a cool place to be. And it's the park opened in 2013. Prior to that, it had kind of, from what I'm told, because again, this was before my time at the History Center, it became kind of an informal gathering place during 9/11. People kind of came there and would leave mementos and tokens. It started out as a memorial to a Vietnam soldier that was killed in Vietnam. The Atlanta Vietnam Veterans Business Association started this space here, and then it's evolved over time into a great place for us to try to honor our veterans as best as we can. And then scattered throughout the park are these little interpretive panels. And on the interpretive panels is a QR code. If you hover your phone over it, it will take you directly into the Veteran Voices, which is the other online exhibit that I wanted to share with you real quickly today. And that one is here, and I'm afraid, 2 secs, let me find it.
Where is that from?
It's right at the corner of Slayton and West Andrews, or Slayton and West Paces. So it's at the, I have to get my directions right, it's at the northeast corner of our campus and connected to our campus. So let me do this really fast. Yeah, there we go. Oh, come on, you were there. Here we go. Okay. So here's Veteran Voices, and the kind of the same thing here that we did with More Than Self, except this is all conflicts. So we kind of picked out the themes that we tend to see in almost every interview, you know, what it's like to be in uniform, what it's like to be in combat, those who served on the home front. That's one thing that we can do that the Library of Congress doesn't do anymore. The Library of Congress has had to kind of narrow their focus a little bit because of the sheer size of trying to capture every veteran story. They don't do civilians who served in direct support anymore, but we can do that. So we've got Rosie the Riveters and Red Cross workers, donut dollies, USO workers. I interviewed the wife of a B-52 navigator who was shot down over Hanoi in 1972 and spent 3 months in the Hanoi Hilton, because I felt like that was an important story to get. You know, what's it like to be a spouse and to see that military car pull up in front of your house and know that nothing good is going to come of this. We've got a couple of Vietnamese folks who fled Vietnam after the fall of Saigon. I interviewed them because I felt like that was an important story. So there's some great content in here. And the way this website is sort of picked out or sort of organized, you can go, I'll just choose Under Fire, for example, and the same thing, you get kind of a featured image. This is Adolphus Walker, who was a tank commander in World War II. He had an amazing story. You've kind of got a major quote and a clip, and then you come down here to where it says, hear more veteran voices on this topic. And when I click on that, I get a playlist on YouTube, and I can scroll down here and select. So we've got, you know, everything from Michael Schlitz, severely injured in an IED explosion in Iraq, to folks that recall the 9/11 attacks on the Pentagon. This is a great clip here, Charles Dryden. I'd play it, but the sound is so bad, I'm not sure you could hear it. But he talks about running into someone at a book signing event, 30 years after the war. He was a Tuskegee Airman, and he was at a book signing event, and this fella came up. He said, you know, he had on a Air Force cap, and he looked as old as I did. And he said, you know, were you part of that unit? And Charles Dryden says, yes, I was. And he says, you know, if it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't be standing here today. He said, we, on a mission to Vienna, we were hit badly, and 2 of you guys came in on either side of us and escorted us back to our airfield safely. And he said, you know, I've had children and grandchildren, and I'm having great-grandchildren. He said, my family owes you my past, my present, and my future. And he said, you know, so then he started to cry. He said the guy started crying first, and then after he told him that, he started. It's such a great quote. So there's amazing, amazing content in here. And that's a website that you can play around with and explore all of these different topics and themes. So the last thing I wanted to share with you is a little bit of a lighter side quote. And again, I'm not sure if we're going to get enough sound to this, but I can't resist sending it or sharing it with you. So to give you a little bit of background.
I was born through.
This is Joe Galloway, and any of you who have seen the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young, he is the co-author of that. He co-authored that book with General Hal Moore, who was the CO of a unit that was nearly overrun in Vietnam in the early days of the war. Joe Galloway is a UPI reporter, and he was embedded with that unit just to kind of see what was going on. And when he got there, they handed him an M16, and he literally fought alongside those guys for 3 days in the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley. And we were lucky enough to get him to come in for an interview. And like I said, this is some of the good stuff that comes at that beginning part, because we asked him, you know, tell us about your background and growing up years. Well, these are his memories of World War II. So you have to listen to this because it's just freaking
3
adorable.
weeks before Pearl Harbor. And I did not meet my father until the end of 1945 when he came home from service. He and 5 of his brothers wore the uniform in World War II, and 4 of my mother's brothers. So we were heavily invested in that war. And my earliest memories are of living in houses full of frightened women, looking out the window for the telegraph boy. You know, they were, all of these uncles and aunts were young couples. They had maybe 1 or 2 kids. The war broke out, and then the father is gone, and he's gone mostly for the duration of the war. Those were the years of World War II, and I have a memory of scrap metal collections and saving bacon grease, which I have no idea what they did, something to do with ammunition. There were, I remember my mother, they only gave you, the ration book only had 1 coupon for a pair of shoes per person per year. And I'm a growing boy. You go through shoes pretty quick. So my mother gave up her shoe ration so that I could have 2 pair a year. Wow. And my father was earning $21 a month in the Army, and he gave us an allotment so that we got $18 of his 21. He lived off of $4 a month. That bought his cigarettes, I guess. And it was interesting times.
Do you remember specifically when your dad came back from the war?
Oh, I remember it like it was yesterday. He came back, and he came up on the porch, and he had the little overseas cap he was wearing, and I wanted that cap, and I was begging for it. And he took that cap off his head, and he threw it out in the yard, and I ran to get it. And when I got back, Mom and Dad were in the house, and the door was locked. So they got busy making my little brother.
Isn't that great? So one last clip I'm going to share with you, and then I promise I'm going to stop talking. This is a Veterans Day compilation that we put together, and this is one of my favorites because it's got some just really great stories in it. So that's another thing that we try to do. We try to come up with little kind of mini documentaries to observe things like Pearl Harbor Day, the anniversary of D-Day, Veterans Day, the 9/11 attacks. We've tried to come up with a little something to observe those important days in our history. And this is one of my favorites.
Soldiers do what they do out of a selflessness and a willingness to give without hope of reward. They do it for their family, they do it for their country, but most of all, what I found is they do it for each other. The man on the left, the man on the right.
You know, they always say your life flashes in front of you and stuff. I really didn't have that, but I definitely was like, okay, this is it for me. This is where my life ends. I'm going to die here, you know, face down on the ground in Iraq. And about the time those emotions and those thoughts were coming over my body, I could hear my guys yelling for me. Before I knew it, they were hitting me with that fire extinguisher. And I don't think I'll ever probably find the words to describe that feeling of that colon sensation and the relief it provided me, like almost instantly. But then it also gave me that, you know, that emotional kind of aspect where, okay, maybe I'm not going to die here on the ground. That if they got to me and I feel like this right now, then maybe I still have a fighting chance to go on.
Well, I was sitting at the desk. This guy came up, he had an Air Force cap on. He looked as old as I did. And he related to me how on a mission to Vienna, announced with the Red Tails, Tuskegee Airmen in the area, 2 of them came over and sat in on each side of him and escorted him all the way back home safely. And he asked me, were you in that outfit? And I said, yes, I was. The guy started to cry. And he went on to say, if it hadn't been for you guys, I wouldn't be sitting here. He said, because we'd have been shot down for sure. And as a result of you having gotten us home safely, I've had children and grandchildren. My family owes you men our past, our present, and our future. But I started to cry.
Everybody who goes over there comes home a little different. What really kind of bothers me is when I go in public, I could have 3 veterans with me. You know, two might be suffering from, you know, post-traumatic stress. One could have a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, and then there's me. And the only one they'll think is me. And they just forget about these guys. But those guys' service is no different than mine. You know, and I have, you know, guys that have multiple deployments always coming up to me and saying, you know, Mike, you know, my service isn't quite the same. It isn't like yours. No, your service is the same as mine. I had one bad day which changed, you know, this part of me, but the actual service, serving your country, is no different.
I believe that what I would like for people to remember is that the freedoms that we enjoy today did not come about by accident, that they were bought and paid for. I believe that free societies from time to time need reminders that their freedoms are rooted in the past. America and of today didn't happen by accident.
I'm very proud of the fact that I have served my country. It was the best learning experience I ever had. The only thing I would hope and pray is that our people, our citizens, go up and say thank you for your service.
So I got like one more slide, and I promise I'm really am gonna be quiet. Come on, you can do it. There we go. So that's my grandfather, Colonel Logan O'Shett. He was Army intelligence for a while. He did a number of things in his career. He taught at West Point. He was a West Point graduate. Was briefly in World War I in the Expeditionary Force after World War I ended. He spent a little bit of time over in France. He was in the Pacific during World War II. He never said anything. He never said a word. And anytime the conversation would come around, I didn't do anything, right? That's my dad, Arthur Jackson Hardy Jr. He was 8th Air Force during World War II in England. Every time I asked him, I didn't do anything. Never talked about it, right? That's my husband, Randy VerHoef. He was Navy intelligence. He always said that was an oxymoron. He liked to say the Navy was 300 years of tradition unhampered by progress. But he loved the Navy dearly. We both did. All three of them are gone. And I lived with that one for 25 years, right? Most of what I know about their service, I have learned since they passed away through documents that I have found. I've seen a lot of you nodding your heads. That's the way it works. You know, I've been up to the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis a number of times, and they've been up to my armpits in some of their service records, fortunately, that didn't go up in the fire. But every record that I find raises another 2 or 3 questions that only they could answer. So that's kind of the parting shot. I tell people I'm a grandmother, and so I do guilt really good. Typically, I do this presentation for veterans, and I'll tell them, you know, that's me and my dad when I was, 18 months old, I guess, somewhere around in there. And that's my 3 youngest children with my husband. So these veterans, if you're a veteran, God bless you for all that you've done. Please think about doing this. It's a legacy that you can provide for your children. It's a legacy that you can provide for teachers. Taught middle grade social study for 6 years. In one school year, I had to get from the Paleo-Indian period to the Clinton administration. Now, you know how much you're going to get done, right? If I had known that these voices were there, that I had these firsthand accounts of these events, you know, what a difference that would have made in the classroom. So if you are a veteran, please think about sharing your story. And if you love a veteran, please encourage them to do so. And that's all I have for you. So I'm here for questions if you have any. Oh, I do have 2 handouts at the back. This is kind of our genealogy stuff at the Atlanta History Center, some of the things we have for family history. And this is my Veterans History Project flyer, and it does have my contact information on the back. I found that I kept losing my business cards, but this is hard to lose. So these are on the back counter back there. So any questions? Anything I can answer for you, either about this or about the History Center? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm curious, Renee. So how do you guys have to go? I mean, from an archival perspective, I'm freaking out that you have, you know, subsidiary right there. When you take in those type of materials, how do you prepare it for permanent?
I'm glad you mentioned that because I should have explained it is definitely beyond, right? It is an unhonored North Vietnamese, you know, it's dead. It's a dud. There's no question. There's nothing explosive about it. But that's a very good question. And the thing is, the History Center is both a museum and an archive. So that's the great part. We have museum storage up in the main museum building, and that's where the guns and the uniforms and the textile, you know, all the 3-dimensional objects, those are stored up there. But I got a great story. If you saw the sea rations, the little picture of the sea rations, great story there. When we were preparing for the exhibit, somebody bought those off eBay. Those are legitimate 1970s sea rations, right? And we wanted to take them into the collection. Yeah, I love that look. We wanted to take them into the collection, and they're not ham and lima beans, so I will tell you, they're not that. We wanted to take them into the collection, wanted to use them in the exhibit, and you know, this is food, right? So my poor collections manager had to open all of it because she had to clean those cans out, and she did. And what she did, which I thought was brilliant, she opened the bottom of the can so we could still display it. It's completely clean and empty. There's not a trace of anything in it, but we could keep it in the collection and display it that way, and nobody would be the wiser, right? So she is the magician behind that, making sure that things are bug-free and food-free and safe. Gordon Jones is our military historian, and he works a lot with, as you well know, works a lot with weapons because that's really dicey and tricky. And there's all kinds of laws and rules and regs on what you can and can't keep. We wanted
AK-47.
AK-47. Couldn't get an AK-47, but one of our veterans had an AR-15, I think, which is a similar weapon that we were able to, you know, show. Yeah, so it's, and you know, we've got 5 million Civil War pieces of weaponry, but that's a good question, and it is something that we have to be really on top of and be very careful about. When I took it from the museum down to I'm walking with this AR. Oh God, I hope I don't get. Hopefully believe it. Okay. Some interesting experiences like that.
You weren't disgruntled that day.
No, I was not disgruntled that day. I was carrying it like a baby. It's my baby.
At 55, I think.
Yes.
What were people?
You know, that's a really good question. Jenny, she is one of those rare interviews where she knew exactly what she wanted to say. She's extremely articulate. She's very attractive. There were a few comments about that. You know, she has aged very gracefully and very well. But she's such a gentle person and talked so feelingly about the guys and the children, the Vietnamese children. She talked about there was the phosphorescent grenade. They had a little Vietnamese child get one of those phosphorus grenades. They ended up losing him ultimately. But she talks, you know, about sitting next to those folks. And I think a lot of the comments we've seen on her particular video are servicemen who were injured in Vietnam. And they'll comment about, oh my God, you were everything to us. You meant the world to us. You know, thank you for what you're doing. So yeah, it's a good question. I don't really know, but my instincts are it's just kind of she's one of those people that you tend to gravitate to. You know, she's just so kind.
Probably because she's a nurse and you don't get those many stories.
That's true too. That's true.
Sometimes you want to know what nurses did, you know, because you won't hear those. Those are, you know, you hear the truth. You know, you hear their stories, but you don't hear the nurse's side.
That's a good point.
You know, my brother was, he was in the medical field in the Air Force. So,
yeah.
But, you know, but he has his side, his story. I was Army, so they were Army. But I was going to make something. I have probably one of the only emergency tools that I consider to be an emergency tool. And when you mention C rations, I carry P38.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
It's a good kind of. Yes, it is. I mean,
you still have it on your ring?
I have two.
Okay. Well, for those of you who
big, small.
For those of you who don't know, that is a small, to call the P38, that's a small tool that was used for a number of things, particularly getting those C rations. And someday somebody needs to show me, we've got one in the collection, somebody needs to show me how you actually did it. Because to me, it just looks like a
while,
knife
I
blade.
mean, you get used to it, but now it actually hurts. You're like, you know, still, you know, that was good back in the time when, you know, we were in the military. But I won't use it now unless I just have to. Honey, where's the candle?
Preferably electric.
I just don't. Hey, I just get that now. If I don't find the can opener, I keep that in the drawer with the rest of the silverware and stuff. Because it's all, I know where it is. She doesn't know how to use it.
So did you use?
Yeah, you know, one's this small and one's this size.
Did you use C4 to heat your?
No.
I heard that story too.
No.
They take a little pinch of explosives.
I wouldn't know about that.
Okay. Did you use it? Yeah.
I've been around trees and cut trees down.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. The what's the word I'm looking for? The innovation, the things that you all did, just they astounded me. The way that you took such a cruddy situation and you just figured out a way to make it work.
You were taught. So I mean, it wasn't something that came natural. It was something that you learned, and it just happened. You know, it's like the one thing the military did teach you is how to figure something out.
Yeah.
If you didn't know how to, you figured it out. You see what I'm saying? So you can get it done. And I think that's why some people gravitate to military people, you know what I'm saying? in times of trying, because sometimes we just have a tendency to work it out quicker, you know what I'm saying? Because some people can't do that.
And I'll tell you what else I've seen in interview after interview, particularly the Vietnam generation, is the post-military volunteerism. These men and women, Ginny, still they all, that, you know, there's the guy that was, he was a military police in the war, and he volunteers for a missing and exploited children unit up in, you know, and they're down at the USO, they're down at the airport greeting those guys that are coming. It just amazes me the spirit of service that comes with being in the military. And I see it over and over again. So bless y'all for what you did.
Right.
And I hope you'll think about sharing.
Talking about the cans you open at the bottom, we did that in first grade.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
So nobody knew that you
brought, you know, we had a little store in our classroom, you know, and we did plenty and all that. And the cans were, you know, the bottom was taken out. And now there's so many cans, you can't do that.
Yeah,
it's
true.
It's very interesting. Anyway, yesterday was the 82nd anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And my father was drafted into World War II and didn't get out until October of 1945. Just 2 months before I was born.
Now, if you go to the History Center's website and or our Facebook page, yesterday we posted a nice little video compilation we did, because we had quite a few Pearl Harbor survivors that were able to talk about them. Wow.
So he was drafted at the age 32. So they didn't make him run up the hill in combat. They made him an MP. So he was sent over to North Africa, to Casablanca, Morocco, and Oran and Algiers in Algeria. And he guarded our own bad boys. And then also he worked in a hospital like in Naples.
Yeah.
As I guess like an orderly. And then he came back from North Africa with German and Italian prisoners of war.
Yes.
And then from Saint-Tropez, France, he came back with German prisoners of war. And we put those Germans and Italians to work in agriculture and such, even here in Georgia.
That was my master's degree. That was my master's thesis.
Oh, really?
I covered Pomona Packing Company down in Griffin. They had a sub-camp from Camp Wheeler down in Macon, and those fellas canned peaches, and I've got photographs. That was, yeah. And the last of the German POWs didn't leave this country until 1947. And they did. They were hugely helpful, because you had guys, you know, and then you had women, you know, taking over some of the workforce, but still needed a lot of help. And it was easier to guard them when they were working. It was, you know, yeah, you could still see where the camp was. Cool.
And I'd like to show this book, The Buffalo Soldier. Before Tuskegee Airmen, there were Buffalo soldiers. And this was after the Civil War. Many were United States colored troops and such. And they went out west, and about, as I didn't know this, about 20% of the military after the Civil War were blacks. So it's a very interesting book. And they also guarded they're the first guardians of the national parks, like Yosemite and such.
So another little known story of World War II, Tyler Perry's actually making a movie. Are y'all familiar with 688? Yeah, they were a quartermaster corps, all women, all African-American women, quartermaster corps unit. They were having trouble getting the mail. The fellows in the field weren't getting the mail. So they brought this group of women in a matter of I'm probably butchering the story, but in a matter of a couple of months, they sorted all the mail out. And they had mail to everybody that was supposed to have it. And they were hugely helpful for morale during you know, there's a million stories out there that still need to be told.
And there's the Rosie, the Riveter National Historic Site north of San Francisco. So if anybody's interested in the women's contribution to World War II, go to that.
Got a couple of Rosies. They had their convention at the History Center a few years ago. And she talked about how they'd be the ones that worked with the rivets, they'd be head to toe asbestos. Can you imagine having to wear asbestos head to toe for hours working on those planes? It's amazing. Anyway, I'm sorry. You get me started and I'll go forever. But thank you so much for your attendance today. And I'll be here if you've got any other questions or whatever. Am I good, Robin? Did I do all right? Yes. Yes.
Symposium before I retired about the Tuskegee Airmen, and I've visited in his home several times, preparing for that, all that sort of thing. And I had a lot of stories to tell. And one thing that was particularly interesting was given the clip that you gave, as we were getting ready to introduce a general from the named Henry Taylor, an African-American general, who was our keynoter that day. And we had, I think, 3 or 4 of the Tuskegee Airmen as the panel, and Colonel Dryden was one of those. A member of the audience interrupted and told me that I was the moderator and told me that he wanted to make a comment. And he came up to where they were and said that he was a pilot. It's just like what you had on the show, that he was a pilot and that they made formal requests for the Red Tails to be their accompaniment. Wish I had that on film so I could give it to you. I'm not sure we don't. We might have it.
If you wouldn't mind checking, and that's the heartbreak, because you saw that was done in that horrible conference room with crappy sound and crappy lighting. I'd give anything if I could get him back in and do it right. And of course, he's
yes, they are. But
yeah.
that was
so cool.
That was special.
If anybody interested in the Red Tails, the Tuskegee Airmen, you can actually go to Tuskegee, to the airfield. It's actually a tourist attraction now.
Okay.
So you can actually go there and see the field and where they filmed the movie, Tuskegee Airmen, Red Tails. You can all of that is there.
I need to do that.
Yes.
I keep needing.
It's
I wasn't sure what was there. So
it's there.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
As part of that symposium, we took them up to Peachtree DeKalb Airport and had an arrangement for a P-51 Mustang to come in and buzz them while they were there, and was made available to take some flights. And we were able to provide a flight for the daughter of one of the Tuskegee Airmen, who, by the way, used to be the district attorney in DeKalb County, Gwen Keyes Fleming. Her father was a Tuskegee Airman.
She probably would be good. We have to talk. We'll talk.